written by Lord Alfred Tennyson in 1854. But before I do that, let us drink to our health. Cheers. Here it is, the charge of the Light Brigade. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward, the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward, the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, boldly they rode and well. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honor the charge they made, honor the Light Brigade, noble 600. Now, as excellently written as that poem is, I think it's important to hear about the story behind the poem. It's about a battle during the Crimean War, which was fought between 1853 and 1856 between Russia and a group of other powers, the Allies they were called, which was France, the UK, the Ottoman Empire, and Sardinia. Now Russia ultimately lost this war, the Crimean War. The immediate cause was over the rights of Christian minorities in the Holy Land. There were two factions here. There were Catholics and those of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, as I said, the short-term conflict was between the rights of these minorities in the Holy Land, but as wars often are, there were longer term conflicts that occurred as well. Specifically, in the Crimean War, the Ottoman Empire had begun to decline, and Britain and France were unwilling to allow Russia to gain new territory at the expense of the Ottoman Empire. Now, ultimately, it was a muddy and a confused war. Regardless of why the war began, it led to a conflict that was very bloody, a conflict of butchery. These Christians who had a dispute over their rights, they ultimately, before the war even began, they worked out an agreement with the Ottoman Empire. But the French Emperor Napoleon III and the Russian Emperor Nicholas I would not back down. Nicholas declared an ultimatum that Christians in the Ottoman Empire be placed under his protection. Britain tried to mediate and come to a compromise that Nicholas agreed to. However, when the Ottomans demanded that changes be made to that agreement, Nicholas recanted and began to prepare for war. In July of 1853, Russia began to invade parts of the Ottoman Empire, and in October of 1853, the Ottomans, along with the help of France and Britain, declared war on Russia, and thus the Crimean War began. Now this war lasted until March of 1856, and there were many blunders in this war, and since it was written of extensively, it is also a symbol of logistical mismanagement during wartime. This war also weakened the Imperial Russian army. It drained the treasury, and it reduced Russia's influence in Europe, which would take decades for it to recover from. Now, during the Crimean War, there was also a woman named Florence Nightingale, who is often called a pioneer of modern nursing, and she worked diligently throughout the war with wounded soldiers. She was beloved by so many that the poet Longfellow wrote a poem in honor of her, to honor her, called Santa Filomena, which I will read to you now. Here we are. Santa Filomena, written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Whene'er a noble deed is wrought, whene'er is spoken a noble thought, our hearts, in glad surprise, to higher levels rise. The tidal wave of deeper souls into our inmost being rolls, and lifts us, unawares, out of all meaner cares. Honor to those whose words or deeds thus help us in our daily needs, and by their overflow raise us from what is low. Thus thought I, as by night I read of all the great army of the dead, the trenches cold and damp, the starved and frozen camp, the wounded from the battle plain and dreary hospitals of pain, the cheerless corridors, the cold and stony floors. Lo, in that house of misery, a lady with a lamp I see, passed through the glimmering of gloom and fled from room to room. And slow, as in a dream of bliss, the speechless sufferer turns to kiss her shadow as it falls upon the darkening walls. As if a door in heaven should be opened and then closed suddenly, the vision came and went, the light shone and was spent. On England's annals through the long hereafter of her speech and song, that light its rays shall cast from portals shall stand in the great history of the land, a noble type of good, heroic womanhood. Nor even shall be wanting here the palm, the lily, and the spear, the symbols that of yore Saint Filomena bore. Now, that is the Crimean War. But the charge of the Light Brigade was part of a specific skirmish, a battle called the Battle of Balaclava, which was part of the siege of Sevastopol, which occurred in 1854. Now, this was an attempt by the Allies to capture the port and fortress of Russia's main naval base on the Black Sea. The Allies prepared for a protracted siege, and the British and French positioned their troops to the south of the port. Now, the battle began with the Russians' artillery attacking the Ottoman redoubts that formed Balaclava's first line of defense. The Ottoman forces resisted the Russian attack at first, but eventually, due to lack of support, they were forced to retreat. When those redoubts fell, the Russian cavalry moved to engage the second defensive line, held by the Ottoman and the British 93rd Highland Regiment, also known as the Thin Red Line. Now, this line held and repelled the attack, as well as did the British Heavy Brigade, who charged and defeated the greater proportion of the cavalry advance, forcing the Russians onto the defensive. However, a final Allied charge, stemming from a misinterpreted order, led to one of the most famous and ill-fated events in British military history, the charge of the Light Brigade. Now, the Light Brigade of the British cavalry was made up of the 4th and 13th Light Dragoons, and the 17th Lancers, and the 8th and 11th Hussars. Now, this Light Brigade was the British light cavalry force. It mounted light, fast horses, which were unarmored. The man had light lances and sabers. They were optimized for mobility and speed. Generally, they were intended for reconnaissance and skirmishing, not for heavy action. They were also ideal for cutting down infantry and artillerymen as they attempted to flee from the heavier brigades. Now, also present that day on that battle was the Heavy Brigade, made up of the 4th Royal Irish Dragoons and the 5th Dragoon Guards and the 6th Inniskilling Dragoons and the Scots Greys. These two brigades were the only British cavalry force at the battle. Now, the Heavy Brigade was the British heavy cavalry force. It had armored horses, and the men were equipped with metal helmets and stronger armor, and they had cavalry swords for close combat. They were intended to be the shock troopers, leading the frontal assault to break the enemy lines. Now, the army commander at that time, Lord Raglan, issued this order: cavalry to advance rapidly to the front, follow the enemy, and try to prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. Troop horse artillery may accompany. French cavalry is on your left. immediate. Now, what Raglan wanted was for the Light Brigade to prevent the Russians from withdrawing naval guns from the redoubts that were captured on the other side of the valley. Now, this was an optimal task for the Light Brigade, as the retreating Russians would have to choose between either abandoning their artillery or be cut down as they attempted to remove it. Now, when the Light Brigade commander was given these orders, he asked which guns the order was referring to, and he was told that he was to attack the mass of Russian guns in a redoubt at the end of the valley, about a mile away, which was not the guns that Lord Raglan had specified. And so the Light Brigade rode straight into this valley, which Tennyson labeled the Valley of Death. Now, waiting for them were Russian forces of 20 battalions of infantry with 50 artillery pieces. The order was that the Heavy Brigade was to follow the Light Brigade into battle, although neither brigades were equipped to actually attack and defeat the guns in the redoubt that they ended up attacking. And although this suicidal charge must have been evident to the Light Brigade, there is no objection on their behalf that is recorded. I would now like to read for you an account by Captain Godfrey Morgan, who was nearby. He says this: "The first shell burst in the air about 100 yards in front of us. The next one dropped in front of Nolan's horse and exploded on touching the ground. He uttered a wild yell as his horse turned round, and with his arms extended, the reins dropped on the animal's neck. He trotted towards us, but in a few yards dropped dead off his horse. I do not imagine that anybody except those in the front line of the 17th Lancers saw what had happened. We went on. When we got about 200 or 300 yards, the battery of the Russian horse artillery opened fire. I do not recollect hearing a word from anybody as we gradually broke from a trot to a canter, though the noise of the striking of men and horses by grape and round shot was deafening, while the dust and gravel struck up by the round shot that fell short was almost blinding, and irritated my horse so that I could scarcely hold him at all. But as we came nearer, I could see plainly enough, especially when I was but 100 yards from the guns. I appeared to be riding straight on to the muzzle of one of the guns, and I distinctly saw the gunner apply his fuse. I shut my eyes then, for I thought that settled the question as far as I was concerned, but the shot just missed me and struck the man on my right full in the chest. In another minute I was on the gun, and the leading Russian's gray horse, shot, I suppose, with a pistol by somebody on my right, fell across my horse, dragging it over with him and pinning me in between the gun and himself. A Russian gunner on foot at once covered me with his carbine. He was just within reach of my sword, and I struck him across his neck. The blow did not do much harm, but it disconcerted his aim. At the same time, a mounted gunner struck my horse on the forehead with his saber. Spurring Sir Briggs, he half jumped, half blundered over the fallen horses, and then for a short time bolted with me. I only remember finding myself alone among the Russians, trying to get out as best I could. This, by some chance, I did, in spite of the attempt of the Russians to cut me down." Valley of Death, and although that artillery devastated their force and their ranks during the ride, they were still able to engage the Russian force on the other side of the valley and force them back from the redoubt. Nonetheless, they suffered heavy casualties, and they were forced to retreat back through that valley. The surviving Russian artillerymen returned to their guns, and they opened fire with grape shot and round shot, and indiscriminately fired at friend and foe. Allow me to continue the account by Captain Godfrey Morgan. Captain Godfrey Morgan continues. When clear again of the guns, I saw 2 or 3 of my men making their way back, and as the fire from both flanks was still heavy, it was a matter of running the gauntlet again. I have not sufficient recollection of minor incidents to describe them, as probably no 2 men who were in that charge would describe it in the same way. When I was back pretty nearly where we started from, I found that I was the senior officer of those not wounded, and consequently in command, there being 2 others, both juniors to me, in the same position. Now the heavy brigade, which was behind the light brigade, and was supposed to follow them during the attack, did not advance into the actual valley with the light brigade. Now the commander said afterward of that heavy brigade that once he realized what had happened, he saw no reason for 2 brigades to be mown down, and so he ordered his brigade to stay where they were. Now a war correspondent named William Howard Russell witnessed the battle, and he said our light brigade was annihilated by their own rashness and the brutality of a ferocious enemy. Now a French marshal at that time said, "It is magnificent, but it is not war." He also said, "It is madness." During the charge, the Russians also thought that the British must be drunk in order to attack with such a light cavalry force upon the artillery of the Russians. Now of those 600 some men of the light brigade who entered into the Valley of Death, 118 were killed, 127 were wounded, and 60 were taken prisoners. In subsequent years, the responsibility for that miscommunication has remained controversial, as the order was vague and misinterpreted, and the messenger who delivered that order died in the very first moments of the assault. Now, Tennyson allegedly heard of the charge of the Light Brigade in the Times, and in only a few short moments, he penned this poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. It was published 6 weeks after the event. It's always read to emphasize the valor of the cavalry unit in bravely carrying out their commands without regard for their safety. And even though the inevitable outcome would be their death. 40 years after this event, another poet, Rudyard Kipling, wrote a poem entitled The Last of the Light Brigade in 1890, which England's might. There were 20 broken troopers who lacked a bed for the night. They had neither food nor money, they had neither service nor trade. They were only shiftless soldiers, the last of the Light Brigade. They felt that life was fleeting, they knew not that art was long, that though they were dying of famine, they lived in deathless song. They asked for a little money to keep the wolf from the door, and the 30 million English sent 20 pounds and 4. They laid their heads together that were scarred and lined and gray. Keen were the Russian sabers, but want was keener than they. And an old troop sergeant muttered, "Let us go to the man who writes the things on Balaclava the kiddies at school recites." They went without bands or colors, a regiment 10 files strong, to look for the master singer who had crowned them all in his song. And waiting his servant's order, by the garden's gate they stayed, a desolate little cluster, the last of the Light Brigade. They strove to stand to attention, to straighten the toil-bowed back. They drilled on an empty stomach, the loose-knit files fell slack. With stooping of weary shoulders and garments tattered and frayed, they shambled into his presence, the last of the Light Brigade. The old troop sergeant was spokesman, and begging your pardon, he said, "You wrote of the Light Brigade, sir. Here's all that isn't dead. And it's all come true what you wrote, sir, regarding the mouth of hell. For we're all of us nigh to the workhouse, and we thought we'd call and tell." "No, thank you, we don't want food, sir, but couldn't you take and write a sort of to be continued and see next page of the fight? We think that someone has blundered, and couldn't you tell him how? You wrote we were heroes once, sir, please write we are starving now." The poor little army departed, limping and lean and forlorn, and the heart of the master singer grew hot with the scorn of scorn. And he wrote for them wonderful verses that swept the land like flame, till the fatted souls of the English were scourged with the thing called shame. Oh, 30 million English, that babble of England's might, behold, there are 20 heroes who lack their food tonight. Our children's children are lisping to honor the charge they made, and we leave to the streets and the workhouse the charge of the Light Brigade. Now, Rudyard Kipling wrote that poem as if the veterans who were of the charge of the Light Brigade, the veterans of the Light Brigade in that battle, as if they were approaching Lord Tennyson and asking him why he did not write a sequel that explained how poorly the British government took care of the veterans of the Crimean War after the fact. It is true that most governments are not well known for treating their veterans particularly well after returning from war. The sacrifice is made, and it is often unrewarded. And so, I think that now, let us reread that poem of valor and courage and obedience, even in the face of certain death, the charge of the Light Brigade. Here we are. The charge of the Light Brigade. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, boldly they rode and well, into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabring the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honor the charge they made, honor the Light Brigade, noble 600. My favorite poem. Before we go, let us drink again to our health. And now, let us say goodnight. Until next time.